information, upon you, and you can just see it in front of you. You're like, now you're like, oh, I feel like every player is always playing with the worst case scenario in mind.
Like Ruby Amethyst, right? Because some of the cards are clearly very powerful, right? Be prepared, all the lady cards, the rabbit, brawl, or I guess brawl now, and friends, right? Draw 2 cards. That's even more better. That's better than drawing 1 card, right?
Really feels that way. You just summed up Disney Lorcana, the first year of Disney Lorcana, like in one sentence.
So I think that that's right on the money. Like I think a lot of people didn't expect a big Sisu, and that's why that card was so powerful, right?
You're like, hey, these cards are particularly good in these like matchups where people only put one thing in play, but they're bad everywhere else. You made the educated choice going, I'm not going to play that card. I'm going to play this other card that's great and do all of these other matchups.
Oh, the next card to be banned in Disney Lorcana, definitely a whole new world. Or okay, personally, maybe that's like a personal thing.
All right, everybody, welcome back to the Forbidden Mountain. Today we are joined with a very special guest, Mr. Edmund Chu. How are you doing this evening, sir?
Good, how are you? Back on the
Great.
mic.
So we're about like 10 days removed from the win, which is pretty
Mhm.
cool. Has it settled in yet?
Yeah, everyone comes up to congratulate you, and you're like a little mini celebrity in a way. So that's
Right.
kind of cool. Yeah.
Did you do like locals or anything this week?
Oh yeah, played some set champs. I did
Okay,
okay in some of them. Top forward in a couple, got a second. So it was a good weekend.
that's great. So that's really cool. You get to go home. You get to play with you're from like North California, right? Somewhere in that area.
Yeah, Northern California. So there's
Oh,
like
wow.
a good amount of locals are in this area. It's probably like 5 or 6 shops, and we all had like they had set champs at different times, but they were usually a
Right.
pretty decent turnout. Like some had like 20, and I've seen upwards of like 50 people show up for
Wow.
this.
50 is pretty awesome. Yeah, the biggest one that I was a part of was 57 players, so
Yeah,
nice. It's hard to do these days, it seems. So, like we just this past weekend, you even look at like SCG Baltimore, and it only
yeah,
had 24 players. So like, like set championships are succeeding at this level at stores, but some of the other third parties are really difficult. Now you've played in a couple of the other third parties too. You played at CCS games, right?
yeah.
They were pretty big tournaments. They were pretty successful. How do you think that with the DLCs officially kind of coming in now, with set championships kind of taking over a month every 3 months, how do you think like
Mhm.
the third party, uh, you know, event series kind of like, do you think they can succeed? Can they be successful?
Yeah. So I think honestly for the Baltimore one, I think it's just timing, right? Like
Right.
specifically, like you said, the way that Ravensburger set up the set championships is like weekends only, right?
Yeah.
Like I remember before during the Stitch championship, man, that was crazy. There was like 9 consecutive days of set champs. I feel like
Right.
there was always like one store on like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and then you hit them all up, right? It was extremely draining, but the reward was there, right? So
True.
yeah, at the time, right?
Yeah, I
But
mean, it also
mhm,
felt really hard to have like two in the same day this time, like there
mhm,
was a couple in my area during the Stitch versions where it's like, oh, you could go in early Saturday, play late Saturday. That felt like really difficult for our area to do this time.
yeah, I mean, for me on Saturday, I actually had two. One
Okay.
started at 12, and the other one started at 6. And I
What?
made to like the finals of the other one had to like concede so I could make it to the other one, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
then I played all the way until like 2 a.m. and
Oof.
it was quite a
Oof.
grind. Like,
That's a
even
day. That's a
even
day.
longer than the challenges, right? Like
I
even the
mean, with travel, with dinner, with all that crap, like, yeah, I mean, that's a long day. I mean,
yeah.
I felt like DLC Dallas, our day one. I mean, what? And player meeting started at 9 a.m. We walked out of there with the announcement of top 64, like 10 of 10. So you're talking like 13-hour day. That's pretty
Yeah.
long.
I mean, it's definitely like an endurance thing, right? And
Right.
you only can get better over like time of going to these events and every time you add like an hour or something. Eventually you get used to it. Like for me personally, like I'm like kind of used to it, but okay, 13, 14 hours is a little bit pushing it for me.
It's a bit long. It's a bit long.
Yeah.
Sir, for those that, are a little bit unfamiliar with your name, I've known you for quite some time, going back to you played, I think, one of my teammates in top 8 or top 16 of the CCS. And then from that point, you became really good friends with George. And then we met in Atlanta. You came over, we had dinner, we were playing testing the night before Atlanta and things like that. And
Mhm.
it seems to me, from my outside perspective, that Ruby Amethyst is a mainstay for you. So can you
Yeah.
talk to me about that a little bit, like your history of playing Ruby Amethyst?
Yeah. So my first deck was actually Amber Steel, and
Okay,
that was when like the Queen came out, Queen Shift. Everyone's thinking like, oh, how do we, use Queen Shift with like a whole new world? Very
right,
good, right? But I think that deck had a lot of uninkables inherently. Whole new world, grab your sword, let the storm rage on. It's just a bunch of cards that you had to play,
yeah,
and it made the deck a little bit bricky for me. And
mm,
I think I played it enough times where I thought I just bricked too much and I wasn't able to play the game, and that was kind of like an unenjoyable experience for me.
okay, fair.
And I guess the next best deck at the time was Ruby Amethyst, right? I think this is like tale as old as time. Ruby Amethyst versus Amber Steel,
Really
right?
feels that way.
Yeah.
You
So
just summed up Disney Lorcana, the
yeah,
first year of Disney Lorcana, like in one
mhm,
sentence.
yes, there you go. So Ruby Amethyst, I think when the Merlin package came out, like I came from like Yu-Gi-Oh background, and like we love drawing cards. That's
Mhm.
like how do we optimize drawing cards, right? There's even a card in Yu-Gi-Oh like Upstart Goblin, like your opponent gains 1,000 health, you draw a card, right?
Okay,
And people are like, oh, why is this good? Like you give your opponent health, but it's like you get to thin your deck out to like
yeah,
instead of a 40 card deck, you get a 37 card deck.
right.
So I kind of applied these kind of concepts into like Ruby Amethyst, right? Because some of the cards are clearly very powerful, right?
Mhm.
Be prepared, all the lady cards, the rabbit, brawl, or I guess brawl now, and friends, right? Draw two
Yeah,
cards. That's even more better. That's better than drawing one card, right?
right.
So
I'd
every
agree. I'd
yeah,
agree. We can go Yu-Gi-Oh.
yeah, exactly, right. And I think something else I kind of thought about recently was when I played Hearthstone. I don't know if you play Hearthstone.
Yeah, yeah, sure.
There was like a warlock
Mhm.
class. That was my
Yeah,
favorite class, right?
yeah, life
And
tap.
yeah, life tap. You get to draw a card. It's oh
Yeah,
my, you get to draw cards. Insane, right?
yeah,
And it's like you can deploy a bunch of characters based on like there's like a giants deck, right? Like you get really low on health and you're able to play like these huge bodies,
right.
right? So I realized like that deck, like the handlock deck, like with the giants and stuff, was actually very similar to Ruby Amethyst,
Mhm.
right? Like they also have like a card called Shadow Flame, which is very similar to Be Prepared, where it's like destroy the whole board, right? Or destroy
Basically,
all
yeah,
your opponent's cards.
yeah.
And I think that's why like I played a lot of that. And then when I played Ruby Amethyst, it like felt very fluid to me. Like I already had this like game plan in mind. Like I'm willing to trade some of my lore or some of my opponent gaining lore
Mhm.
for maybe to be able to like draw more cards and just overwhelm my opponent with like card advantage eventually.
So it's kind of the epitome of like understanding that lore is a resource, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which ironically is like, that's another tale as old as time. It's just like life is a resource, lore is a resource. So like understanding that your opponent can get to 19 and not win the game. You know, it, it,
Hmm.
I think it's really difficult for players to like understand that or really functionally understand that this deck has the capability of going, you can get to 18, but
Mm.
like that doesn't mean you're gonna get to 20 because eventually you're just like, I have an answer for the rest of the game, or I'm gonna be able to actually beat you in the race when you're running on empty.
Yeah. So I think it's actually extremely prevalent in this current meta when you go against Emerald Steel, right?
Mhm.
Like I think a lot of people when you play Ruby Amethyst versus Emerald Steel, people want to like deploy to the board, right? Oh, let me play my Snake or my Flynn, my Sisu. I need to make sure I'm able to like contest their characters or else they're just gonna keep gaining lore, right?
Yeah.
And I always tell them like it's okay. Like let them get to 10, 15, it's fine. Like
Yeah.
eventually you'll get to the point where you can just keep them off the board for the entire game and it's over, right?
Yeah.
Versus if you blow too many of your resources early, you'll never be able to get to that point where you can blow them out of the game.
Right.
So like I think it teaches you that, it's okay to let them gain the lore. Eventually you'll be able to catch up.
Now the clear understanding here is the big change here, right? Is that you've added effectively two more Be Prepareds in the Emerald Seal matchup and in some other matchups as well. But uh, Sisu Floodborn was a critical part of your run into the first place, winning DLC Fort Worth. Talk to me about that decision of adding her to the deck.
Yeah. So I didn't really test it that much, but I kind of heard some murmurs like, oh, like there's like a Sisu that kind of blew me out of the game while I was playing Emerald Steel.
Mm.
And like you can shift on it, you can just hard cast it. And I thought that idea was very interesting. Like going back to like the CCS, right? Like I ran like Formlifts and Dragons, 4 Medusas, 4 Tremaines. And
Right.
I
Yeah,
thought that
you were
was,
the first one and kind of like cap out the 4/4 of like Medusa and Tremaine saying, I'm just gonna kill a card every turn.
yeah. So yeah, and I ran no castles at the time, right?
Right,
So
right.
I was very in love with the idea of being able to get like a 2-for-1 deal, right? Like no matter what, when you play the card, it has a huge impact on the board and it demands an answer. And I really like these style of cards. And to me, Sisu was actually kind of similar in that vein. If you really think about it, like if you play Sisu, you can kill one thing, potentially two things, three things, etc.
Yeah.
And it demands an answer, right? She's
Yeah.
huge, like 5/4, quest for three, like three is quite a bit, right? Like
Yeah.
three is equivalent to like goat bounce goat, which is like a 10 play, and that requires like 2 cards, right? But
Right.
this one, in addition to getting lore, you also present a body on the board and you're able to like destroy whatever your opponent is also trying to do, right?
Yeah, and I mean, before we go a little bit further, like I think what was going on is that Ruby Sapphire was very clearly successful with the Sisu in their deck,
Hmm.
and I feel like Ruby Amethyst players were kind of locked in to a given amount of uninkables and never really even adapted or molded to the idea that you could have this Sisu because you're like, oh, I have to have Tremaine, I have to have Medusa, I have to have BKU. Like, since I have to have all these cards, there's just no room for this 8 cost uninkable.
Hmm.
You broke the mold. You know, you were like, no, this works because like we don't have to play these things. You know, which I think is very interesting. And you've I'm sure over the last couple weeks you've probably explained this a million times. But what was that click moment of going, you know what? I don't need Tremaine. I don't need BKU. I just want more cards that honestly get more than a 1-for-1. And in most of these cases, Be Prepared is winning you a game against Emerald Steel. We can make the same, like, honestly, we can make the same conversation for Sisu, because if your opponent just doesn't have, like double Let the Storm Rage on, or the Strength of a Raging Fire, or the Zeus, and they don't know to hit, your Sisu, they're not even
Hmm.
expecting the shift line from you at all. I mean, going into this weekend, I don't think anybody was on Sisu at a high competitive level in Ruby Amethyst. So that had to be a huge advantage for you through the tournament.
Yeah. So I think that that's right on the money. Like I think a lot of people didn't expect a big Sisu, and that's why that card was so powerful, right? Like I'm pretty sure a lot of my opponents, like when they saw me play, like like I'm not like super popular or anything. Like I'm just like some random guy, right? Like some people don't
Sure.
know me, and like they see me play Sisu on 5, and they're like, "Oh, dude, what is this guy doing? Like you're not supposed to be doing that, like
Right.
But they just leave it alone, right? Because it's like, oh, it's not doing anything. It's non-threatening, right?
Yeah.
And turn 6, you hit them with the boom, big Sisu, blow up their whole board, and it's like, oh, like
Yeah.
I'm in trouble, right? So
Like,
I think,
oh, Yahtzee moment. Okay.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So I think it did have tons of value in the Swiss format when it was closed deck list and nobody knew about it. But even in the open deck list, like it also has a lot of value, right? Like people have to respect the big Sisu because
Yeah.
it reminds me of I remember people were theory crafting Mulan in the beginning, the
Right.
one drop with the shift, and
Yep.
oh, if you expose one character, it's gonna Mulan shift and like blow up your whole board, right? So I think it's very similar in that sense where you have to respect the Sisu because if you don't, you can potentially just get like blown out by that card.
Yeah, I mean, information is uh dangerous, right? Like, so the
Okay.
lack of thereof information, you can get yourself in trouble. The information, upon you, and you can just see it in front of you. You're like, now you're like, oh, I feel like every player is always playing with the worst case scenario in mind. So they're
Mhm.
like, oh my, like if he just has it, like if he just has this two of in his deck, I'm getting blown out. And then they start making these like insane plays to try and prevent it, and then like they might just be worse off just because they knew you even had it, which is funny to think. But hey, I mean, works both ways, right? Works both
Yeah.
ways.
And I guess regarding Tremaine and BKU, so I mean, since the beginning, like the CCS, like I think Tremaine was my favorite card, right?
Yeah,
Like every time I saw that card, I was like, how do I make this card the best card possible, right? Because I think ever since I think one person at locals they played a Tremaine and then like shifted it and then
yeah,
bounced both of them back to their hand, and I was like, wow, that is it's like Yada Lock, like in Yu-Gi-Oh
Yeah,
terms,
so
like
good.
Yada Lock, like
Yes.
you prevent them from drawing, right? Like,
Yeah.
but Lady Tremaine is similar, right? You prevent your opponent from doing anything. Anytime they like, you need characters to kind of win the game, right? Like,
Yeah.
to be honest, like that, you I guess that you can technically win with like flutes and stuff, but okay, in general, you
Right.
need to have some characters to win the game, right?
Right.
And if you're able to just lock your opponent out of the game by just every turn, Tremaine, Tremaine, bounce, Tremaine, Tremaine, bounce, eventually the game will just end because you have like 100 cards and your opponent has like none, right?
Yeah.
So I really like Tremaine. Okay, like don't get me wrong, that card is amazing. But the reason why I cut it in particular for this particular tournament was I expected a ton of Emerald Steel, and I played against a ton of Emerald Steel at a
Right.
local level, and I noticed that every time I had like Tremaine or BKU in my hand, I just discarded them, right? And
Right.
they didn't really do anything. So I wanted my deck to be a little bit more live and have better inking decisions. And I just thought like if this was just an ink, this would be so much better, right? Like you can just ink the card and discard other cards instead and
Yeah.
just have the flexibility to work your way up to a Be Prepared or a big Sisu. So I think in this particular meta, I think Tremaine is a little bit like lacking. Like even in the mirror, right? Like most of the time what are you able to like really kill with the Tremaine, right? Like if you play against someone and you keep parity with them, sometimes they always keep like those kind of low cost, like you can leave like a one drop on the board to eat the Tremaine or the BKU,
Yeah.
and I thought those cards were kind of dead, right? And uninkables, they need to be live most of the time, right? Like you can't ink them, so you're
Right.
gonna have to play them at some point in the game. And personally, I didn't really feel like there was ever kind of a good time to play Tremaine or BKU, especially like against Green Steel and mostly even against Ruby Amethyst right now.
That's fair. Um, I think obviously you kind of touched on this a little bit here, but by removing effectively, going into this weekend, the last several Ruby Amethyst decks that have won have been playing 16 uninkables. I mean, you lost 4 of them. Like straight up, just got rid of them and said, "I'm going to alter this a little bit, and we're going to play Sisus. We're going to play effectively 6 Be Prepareds on our deck, and then obviously we have to play Rabbit because Rabbit's insane, and we'll just mellow it out with a couple other uninkables here." By making that choice, I truly believe that you went for consistency over power, right? And I
Mhm.
think this is a conversation that happens a lot, and I think it's a really interesting one because on average in these 2 game formats, right, where you have to get 2 O's, I feel like a lot of people have leaned towards just playing the more powerful deck that says, you know what, I do this crazy thing, and if I can do this on the draw, I can win this game and I can 2-0. I
Mhm.
feel like you approach it differently, which is why I really want to touch on this. You
Mhm.
approach it in this matter of like, I just want to be able to do almost the same thing in every game.
Mhm.
So what is that approach to your deck building for DLCs?
Yeah. So I think this deck in particular, I think you still have consistency, but I think the way I like to look at it is you can try to consistently get to Be
Mhm.
Prepared or Big Sisu. So I think the way I think about it, like the previous versions, like the George Luca Kendall version, like that version became very popular, right? Four one drops, 16 uninkables, and I think the power curve of that deck is more like above average. Like most of it is like you're gonna have a lot of your power cards, like Tremaines and BKUs. You're able to do these like power plays like mid-range style.
Yeah.
The way I like to think of this deck is instead of like having all that power in that mid-range, you're sacrificing it there to try to get it to that top end, right?
Right.
Like you're trying to set up a huge Be Prepared, huge big Sisu play, and that is kind of the payoff of the deck. And
Right.
if you look at how the deck is constructed, it's kind of shaped to draw a lot of cards and then eventually get to that big payoff. So instead of doing that kind of mid-range strategy of like, getting that 2-for-1,
Yeah.
you're trying to go to that higher end of Be Prepared, big Sisu, multiple castles, multiple goats, and
Right.
just like overwhelm your opponent in like a couple, like 1 or 2 turns.
Very fair. Very fair. It clearly worked out, by the way.
Yeah, yeah.
All right. So as of today, full spoiler has been revealed for Shimmering Skies. So we do get to talk a little bit about some of these new cards. And I guess before we really look at some of this stuff, like is there anything that 100% catches your eye that says, "Oh, this is going to fit or slot into Ruby Amethyst"?
Okay, so I did look at all the Ruby and Amethyst cards, of course, right? And
Okay.
honestly, a lot of them are extremely underwhelming. Like,
Yeah.
I think the best one that I saw was actually Bruni. Like, I think
Okay.
that card is actually potentially viable, but it's like, what are you gonna cut, right? And my initial thought was like, maybe you can cut Goat, but after playing that card, it's like, maybe not, right?
I don't know about cut and go. That's
I'm
so
not gonna
tough.
do it because it's like unconditional. Like we said earlier, like we want that huge payoff, right? Like
Right.
everything you're doing up to that moment, you're just drawing cards and like stopping your opponent from completely killing you, and then you get these huge like triple castle, triple goat, crazy
Yeah.
plays. So Bruni kind of fits more into that like mid range style,
Yeah.
where you're trying to get like super like mid range
I mean,
value.
Bruni I mean, it's not the greatest thing ever, but he's definitely a protected way to sing BKU, which is nice. And
Yeah,
like with the evasive stat line, but I digress. I still think it's very difficult.
I mean, maybe in a different meta, right? Like,
Yeah.
back in set three with like the surfer, like this
Yeah.
slots very nicely into that. You can go like Pegasus or Pascal,
Yep.
Pegasus, surfer, Bruni. Oh, look at this, all evasive
Yeah, man.
questing kind of thing, right? But
Evasive mid range control. There it is. We're
yeah,
solving the next meta already, Ed.
yeah. But honestly, like I think it probably doesn't work that well now because there's definitely just more powerful things you can do. Like I looked at a lot of the Amber cards and they look crazy. Like I think
Yeah.
Amber Steel and like Sapphire X decks
Yep.
are going to be the ones that get the most toys and probably will take over the meta.
It's very
Um,
fair. Quick thoughts on library.
Okay, so yeah, people ask me like, do you think this card's good? I think it's a little bit too slow.
Okay.
I know a lot of people are like, oh, what if you put like Magic Broom, Chernobog, and you can draw two, and it's like, I think that's a little bit too much setup for me, and
Sure.
like I think you're giving a little bit too much like tempo to your opponent by doing so. And what are you gonna take out? Like, do you want to take out like Castle and like it's a location for location? But I feel like Castle is one of those cards that you're able to kind of just like end the game. This
Yeah.
is also more of a mid range card, and I
Yeah.
think that's why I kind of don't like it. And it's a little bit slow. If you want to just play these kind of like really slow decks, I would rather go to Sapphire Way, right?
I think there's a world where it fits more into like the amber amethyst, like aggro, or like the emerald amethyst. I can see them just being like this protective shell around their characters that are just going to get banished all the time. Where
Mhm.
it's like, all right, well, I'm going to take this turn off. I'll just chuck two guys in this, and now like when you get rid of these guys, I'm going to draw two cards, refill my hand because they're kind of like a way more difficult like board control deck. So like at least they're getting extra bonus of making all their cards a Cusco basically.
Mhm.
Um, but I do agree. I think in Ruby Amethyst itself, it's very difficult. You know, in a world where I want Castle 5 or maybe 5 and 6, like maybe there's a way that this card makes sense. Like 8 willpower for 3 is very good. It has a lore and it turns all my cards into a Cusco. So like it
Yep.
does a lot of stuff that we wanted to do, right?
Yeah, but
But yeah,
I
I
think
don't
yeah, I
know.
think it's too slow. And I think
Yeah.
the other card that like a lot of people were talking about was the new elephant, Madam Mim elephant, right?
Yeah, we have that on. We
Yeah.
put it on here. Do you think this card? I don't think this. I'm not a big fan.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit too expensive for what it does.
Yeah.
And I think it's like potentially cute with like you can play people teeth and ambitions. You can like do a
Mm.
little damage thing, but I think that four slot especially now is very full, and I really like the Madam Mim cards just because, or the other ones like Snake and Fox because they're
Right.
very inexpensive, right? Like two
Yeah.
cost, three cost, it does the job for a lot cheaper.
And listen, like a 3/7 is nothing to shy away about, right? Like that's a gigantic card.
Yeah, but I think for that cost, like I feel like you want to be doing something else.
Yeah, I
Instead.
tend to agree. No love for the Elsa here.
Actually, the Elsa was also another card. It's like, okay, maybe you can play this, but I think it comes down to like, oh, what are you gonna take out, right?
Yeah.
And I guess like right now the slot is only Maui, but I think one of the kind of things that people don't think about for five is that it's actually not for playing five costs. It's mostly for like a
For
three
parents.
plus two or 2+3 or kind of thing, like Snake and Maleficent or like Sisu. and Snake or Brawl or whatever, right? Like that slot is mostly for that purpose.
Right.
So I think it also doesn't fit very nicely into the deck.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because we in set three we were all about the Pinocchio, right? Like, and there was a lot of the format that revolved around exerting a character and kind of getting away with it, and then obviously bouncing Pinocchio back and things like that. I think Elsa has the potential to like work into it if the metagame calls for it, which is great because at the end of the day, it's an inkable card. So Ruby Amethyst has this wonderful concept of like whatever the meta calls for, somehow you always have like the toolbox for it. And
Yeah,
I think that she really does slot well into this world where if we need a way to exert characters, then like having a 2/5 with rush and evasive sounds like a great way to go about it.
yeah. So specifically, I guess Pinocchio. Like I've always didn't like Pinocchio to be
Okay,
honest. Like, yeah, back then, like I would be like, oh, I'd rather just play the ladies. Isn't that just better? But you
fair.
know, obviously, like it's a two cost, right? So it's like you can do like exert things before turn 6. So that's the like that's the value of the card,
Yeah,
right? But I think there Elsa might be good if Diablo decks become very popular, right?
yeah,
This one is the best Diablo killer, right? Like
yeah.
you can just attack a Diablo, right?
And
And
it's
even
thinkable. Like you don't have to like sit with a bad card in your hand. You're like, well, when in doubt, if I don't need this in this matchup, see you later.
exactly. And I think the other kind of another reason why I like Tremaine over BKU is it's also reusable with like the Madam Mims, right?
Yeah,
So this Elsa is also reusable. Like if you have it on the board in the future turn you actually need to reuse it, you can bounce it back, replay it, re-exert something, kill that thing. So
yeah,
I think in Ruby Amethyst specifically, I think characters have way more value over like action cards.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it's I guess it's like a really hard comparison. But it's like we could somehow compare this to like Dragonfire, which we have not played since set one, realistically.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
The idea that you have like a walking character that exerts things, that forces challenging, it gives you the opportunity to like catch people off guard or get rid of like problematic characters.
Hmm.
Even in a world where if we had just play Maui on 5 as we normally do,
Hmm.
having an Elsa on 6 to allow Maui to like obliterate any card in the game is not the worst thing ever, right? I like the idea here. For me, I think it's probably really easy, like one of the just like catch people off guard and like force action.
Yeah.
But I can also, like you said, if Diablo is just running the world, if like evasive decks are just running the world, if all of a sudden Bruni becomes like the greatest card ever,
Hmm.
well, good news is you have Elsa just lying in wait for it.
I think the downside of the cards also only has 2 strength. Like,
Yeah,
I think that's a little low. Like, I
yeah,
think if it's like 3, oh yeah, I'm playing that for sure. Like, I
sure.
think that's 2 versus 3 is actually very relevant.
It is. It's
And
definitely going to be like, is this a world where like my goat on 4 all of a sudden gets like 2-for-1 trades because of this Elsa? Because like
yeah.
with a 4 power goat, if I come in Elsa and then I exert something, my goat can run into it. My goat maybe lives. Like that's the hope here.
Mhm.
Um, then I could see like, hey, maybe there's more lines there, but until the metagame kind of like reveals itself, it'll be hard to really evaluate this like the full power of that card, I think.
Yeah. And honestly, I hate playing goat on 4. I think
No,
that
I
gets
hear you. I'm
right.
with you. I'm with you.
Like you have to, right, for this
Right.
particular
It's better than
slot.
not playing anything, right?
Yeah, 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 for sure.
um, so we're kind of like entering this very weird state of the game now where set champs are over. The next 2-3 weeks are like just this weird part of the game where Bucky still exists, but August 9th hits, Shimmering tries come out, Bucky gets errated.
Yeah.
What kind of impact do you think that makes for this deck in the set 1 through 4 meta for Toronto?
Hmm. Well, I mean, I think this has kind of happened before, right? Remember when we had like set 3 only and then set 4 already came out, right?
Yeah,
In Atlanta. And
yeah,
then people kind of already forgot about it after like the day after it's like, oh, like on to the next set, right?
right.
So I think to me, I think it's actually kind of interesting to have like these one-off style tournaments because it's like everybody gets to play kind of something new every time, right?
Yeah,
Versus like, oh, this DLC is the same meta every single time, right? And I think it's pretty interesting to be able to just have this kind of like play test only for one event, and like whoever brings the best idea wins because it's not extensively tested,
It's
right?
really funny that you mentioned like
Yeah.
specifically that concept because I mean, let's be honest, the devs weren't planning on errata or banning Bucky when they were testing set 1 through 4. So it really is like an untested format more than likely than not because I mean, I think you and I can agree that they really removed Bucky because of experience, not because of power. So
Hmm.
like because they wanted to get rid of this negative experience in the game, they weren't ever testing for what this like would look like without the power of Bucky or anything like that.
Yeah.
So I think it's kind of cool, but it's also like one of those situations where there's only 1,000 people that can play in that tournament, so a very small portion of the game is to care about it. So
Yeah.
I'm gonna be there. I'm pretty sure you're gonna be there, right? So like
Yeah.
obviously we're committed to the tournament. We're like, yeah, we're gonna break the format and try to do our best.
Yeah.
But it is just one of those awkward moments where you're like, huh, like how many people are really going to be invested in this one DLC with a format that dies literally the moment it ends?
Yeah. I mean, okay, look, the DLCs, the prizes are huge, right? Like
Yeah,
golden Mickeys, those things are crazy. You get the invite. So the incentive is definitely there, right? And
right.
there will be people like including myself that want to do well at those tournaments. And I think it's like no matter what they present, like we'll try our best to kind of figure out what the best solution will be, right? And it's also fun, right? Like even though it's just for one day, like you put in all your hard work for that one day and then maybe it can pay off for that particular tournament.
Yeah,
So I think it's kind of fun. Yeah.
for North America, we've only had 3 DLCs. That's only 48 players
Yeah.
for nationals, right? Like we're doing our best to try and get past that. So
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
there's plenty on the line for sure.
Yeah.
All right, sir. So a little game we like to play on the channel here is called Repeat After Me. I'm gonna say a statement, and then you're gonna repeat the statement with the answer.
Hmm.
Cool.
Yep.
Uh,
See,
the best part about winning DLC Fort Worth was
the best part about winning DLC Fort Worth was kind of the conviction that I had. Because I feel like sometimes, when you do poorly at tournaments, all you think about is like the tournament results, right? And sometimes you start doubting yourself, like, oh, did I make the wrong choice? Or was it just variance, right? And I think being able to like win one of these kind of gives yourself some confidence that you would expect to know what you're talking about, right? So I think besides anything else, it gave me like a lot of confidence that I could you know play the game and be good at it, right? So for me, I think that's the most valuable thing I took out of all this.
yeah. I mean, and to note here, just to repeat your little resume. You finished in the top 100 in Atlanta, which was a 2,000 player tournament. You finished in the top 32 in Chicago, and then you won Fort Worth. So, and then you also top 8 at CCS, one of the 10Ks, right?
Yeah, like second. Yeah, second. Hmm.
Right. So like, you had this resume, right? Like that you have been a proven player within the metagame or within Disney Lorcana's, early organized play,
Hmm.
um, specifically this year, obviously. But that idea, that concept of like, hey, I'm on the right track. Hey, I got a little bit better. Hey, I did it, right? Like, it's not. I mean, there's only so many people. It's crazy to really say this. There's only so many people that can say that. Hey, I took down an 1,800 plus player tournament, right?
Yeah.
So it's a huge achievement, man. Congratulations again on that
Thank
one.
you. Yeah.
All right, so a little bit more fun here. The one card in Lorcana that bothers me is
The one card in Lorcana that bothers me is A Whole New World. Man, that card is so broken. Like every time I see any deck that can play that card, I'm extremely scared, right? Because like me fundamentally, I love like big hand sizes, and that card can just completely like wipe it out in a single turn, even deck you out, right? So that card scares me, and you have to play extremely fundamentally different if you're playing against a deck that has that card.
well, I have a feeling where this next one's going to go, but I
Yeah.
fully agree with you for 100%.
Yeah.
I think a whole no world is man, that's a tough card.
Yeah.
It's like, oh man, so many levels of it are like just so difficult to kind of get by, but here we are. We're banning Bucky, it's fine.
Yeah.
So with that, the next card I could see being banned or errata in Disney Lorcana is
Oh, the next card to be banned in Disney Lorcana, definitely a whole new world. Or okay, personally, maybe that's like a personal thing. But I have heard like other people also say kind of similar things where it's just like, you work so hard for this hand and then they dump it.
Yeah,
But besides that, I think the other reason why it's really strong is because you get to play that card first, right? So you can
yeah,
actually dump your whole hand, have like 0 cards, and then just play that card, refresh your entire hand,
yeah,
right? And it's like you can optimize it to a way where it's like draw 6 cards, 7 cards.
yeah. And not to
So,
mention
yeah,
technically discard 5 cards, discard 4 cards. Like,
exactly.
the upswing of it is,
Yeah.
it's very similar to a Bucky, in all honesty. Like
Mhm.
the removing the experience, removing the strategy, the mulligan. At the end of the day, you can a whole new world in turn two if your opponent keeps a 7 card mulligan, and you're like, all right, well, dump it, start over, and hey, good luck.
Yeah.
So,
The queen shift into whole new world is like one of the most broken things in the game.
it's pretty
And
mean. But when your opponent keeps 7 and you go, okay, and it's like,
yeah,
sorry.
exactly. And I think the other thing is just like when they keep certain cards, like those are the cards that they actually want, right?
Right,
So their deck is actually filled with more cards that they don't want.
right.
And I think the other thing is that it's a song, right? Like, did
Yeah,
they really have to make this card a song? Like, come on, like even casting it for 5 is like pretty strong already. Like being
yeah.
able to do it like in the early turns before your opponent gets to do anything is a little bit. I mean,
Yeah, I mean, it's really funny, because we came from set one where singing "Be Prepared" was pretty common. We've really gotten away from that, and obviously Sisu is kind of like a walking "Be Prepared" in some matchups now. But
mhm,
we got really far away from the worlds of like exerting Ursula 7 and singing "Be Prepared" and then slamming down the next best threat.
mhm.
uh, a whole new world, even to this day. Like, if you're paying 5 to play it, you can still win the game because of it. Like, we're not like, yeah, it's abusive when you're like, I tap my aerial, I play this for free, and I still have all these resources. But even when you pay 5 for this card, it's pretty surreal.
Yeah.
No debate about that one. All right, so the other game we like to play on here is a little quick thing of Would You Rather, and I already know where some of these are going to go. We're going to do them anyway.
Mhm.
It's all right. So our first one is, as a Ruby Amethyst player, which of these cards would you rather see your opponent play? Sleepy's Flute or Golden Harp, and why?
Oh yeah, so yeah, based on like my current deck choice, I would rather see Golden Harp, right? Like Golden Harp actually is interactable, right? And Sleepy's Flute is not interactable. So I personally like, you also have like the big CC, right? Oh, that's like probably one of the best feelings. They play a bunch of Golden Harps and you big CC, boom, 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 right?
Yeah,
So, but flutes are very, very scary. You can deploy them at any time, and then even if I have, or if they have like no characters, and I have no characters, they can just play like Let the Storm Rage on, tap 2 of them, gain 2 lore, right?
yeah,
So yeah, I'm very scared. That's like the second most scary card, right? Sleepy Flute.
yeah.
So definitely, I would rather sit
So,
across.
I mean, honestly, if you really looked at the landscape, yeah, last weekend when you got your top 64 breakdown, you got the email, and you can go into the sheet, you can look at the deck list, like knowing you were going into those matchups, and the majority of the Amber Steel players didn't have Flute. Did that make you feel better about your chances on the day?
Okay, to be honest, I didn't really look that far into it. Like I didn't like alone. Let me plan out the entire
Sure, sure, sure.
like I think for me, honestly, like I only planned out maybe like the first 2 matchups,
Okay. 'Cause
three matchups I
you,
could
I
have.
mean, goal one was getting the top 16, right?
That's the number one. Yeah, for me personally, that day I was like, let me just get the invite, right? Like
Yeah,
before I got top 32, okay, now I need to get the invite. That's the
yeah,
next goal. Let's do it. Right.
yeah,
And then after that, I remember like I sat down to play my top 8 opponent. I was playing green yellow. And that was actually the first time I saw that deck. Right? I looked at that.
yeah,
I was like, dude, what is this? Like how did he get this far? Right. And like, after game one, he smashed me. I was like, oh, okay, I see the angle, right?
yeah.
So yeah, like I didn't really think that far to be honest. So
Very fair. Very
yeah.
fair. Okay. Uh, our next one here. Would you rather play against Prince John or Hiram Playersham?
Okay. So I would say it's exactly the same as the last answer. Prince John is not interactable, very scary to deal with, right? And like you could do Sisu and be prepared, but that's it, right? Versus
Mhm.
Hiram, like if I'm going against Sapphire, I specifically look for brawl for the Hiram, right? It's similar to when you're going against Diablo, you look for brawl for the Diablo. So
Right.
Hiram, when I see it, I'm like, I'm just gonna brawl and continue my game plan. Where
Yep.
Prince John is like, oh man, I gotta wait until like turn 6 shift or like be prepared, turn 8 big Sisu, and it causes like quite an issue for me.
Now the Prince John for like the Emerald decks, not all the Emerald Steels adapted the Prince John strategy. Some did. Would
Mhm.
you think that the Emerald Steel, in the pre Bucky errata here, the ones that were able to fit in Prince John, were you think they were a little more difficult to deal with because now your opponent was actually drawing as you were discarding?
Yeah, so I think Prince John Bucky is like kind of a throwback to like set when did it come out?
Two,
Set 2? Yeah, set 2.
yeah,
Yeah, because I remember people were doing like the Bucky into Prince John into Floodborns, and
right,
the strategy where you just like, oh, let me try to ink to be prepared was definitely not as good, right?
no,
Because the reason why that strategy of just like drawing into be prepared and eventually like be preparing them is good is because eventually your opponent will be like on a low hand size, right?
right,
Like if you can make sure you get rid of the Diablos on the spot, by the time that you be prepared, they maybe only have like 1 or 2 cards in hand, right? And that's why you would win because like your top decking ability is definitely better than your opponents. But when they had Prince John, they would actually have 5, 6 cards in their hand after you be prepared, and you would have two, and then eventually they'll just redeploy the same things,
right.
Bucky, Prince John, and I'm just gonna keep going, right? The good players always save those two for after be prepared, and then just do the same thing to you over and over until you lose.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah, it's really difficult too because like we can kind of agree that like, hey, if I get to be prepared against Emerald Steel, this is great. But if I didn't have an answer to Diablo on turn 3 and it drew 4 cards, like I'm not in a good position still. Like I'm still very far behind. I probably need to find a second be prepared to even kind of recover from the first one. But when you brawl the Diablo, when you Medusa the Beast, and they're just like stranded, also, you're in a way. That's when be prepared is just so good, right?
yeah.
All right, last one for you. This is you already slam dunked this one. When we're playing in Sapphire Steel, would we rather play against the whole new world version or the no wheel version?
Yeah, definitely the no wheel version. But actually, I lost to Sky in Chicago top 32. He was playing the no wheel version, but he also had like Beast and stuff like that to do like the hand replenishment aspect. And I think at the time, I would say the wheel version was extremely popular. And even till today, I would say wheel is composed probably like 80% wheel, 20% no wheel, maybe
I,
even like 90%, right?
yeah,
So when I see wheel, it's you definitely have to play extremely differently versus if there's no wheel, you can actually just like keep drawing cards and like try to find like a be prepared, and like they can't just like take it away from you, right? So your game plan is actually a little bit fundamentally different in that you can actually keep more hand size and you don't have to deploy as much to the board
right.
when you see wheel versus no wheel.
Very, very fair. I have to agree with you. If I have to choose, I don't ever want my opponent to have a whole new world in their deck.
Yeah,
All right, sir. We've gotten through a pretty good portion here. You're able to pick up a gold Mickey. What was your number, by the way?
I got 66.
66. Nice. That's
Kind
a
of
pretty
fun.
cool. That's a good number.
Yeah,
Okay. That's
yeah,
not bad. I love this photo that you posted. I'm also a hoarder. I haven't sold any of my stuff that I've won this year either.
yeah,
I just haven't laid it out like you have here. But it's really cool to see, the 3 DLCs there, the play mats, obviously the enchanted binder is gorgeous. You know, when it comes to Disney Lorcana, you clearly have already made a name for yourself and you've proven yourself. But where did your trading card game skills come in before this? Like what were you playing at a professional level before?
okay, so I know some people are like, oh yeah, the pro players, right? And it's like,
Sure,
honestly, like I'm not I don't consider myself a pro player. Like a pro player is like someone that does it professionally and like they can make a living off of it. Like
sure.
I'm pretty sure you can't make a living. Okay, for me personally, I don't think I can make a living off of playing Lorcana. So for me personally, I'm just like just a regular player, right?
Mhm,
And before Lorcana, I played like some Yu-Gi-Oh. Like I think I talked about some Hearthstone, and I think those games taught me a lot about fundamentals of the game, right? Just like card games in general, right? Like how do like I think it comes down to like how do you win in card games, right?
mhm.
And I think it comes down to like can you use your cards better than your opponent, right?
Right.
In a way, it's also like chess, right? like everybody has the same pieces, and then can you utilize your pieces better than your opponent? And that's where the skill edge is, right? And I think in Hearthstone in particular, it taught me a lot about like value trading, right? Like I think the most like common thing that happens, especially like Ruby Amethyst mirrors, it's like, can your Maui attack like a goat or a Medusa and survive, right? And if it does, that's very good, right? Like you're able to keep your Maui on the board while they lost a card. So if you're able to like get these small incremental advantages over time, eventually you'll win the game,
Yeah.
right? So with that kind of mindset, I kind of brought that to Lorcana, and like I guess it translated very well in that sense.
A few takeaways for me. Some of the things that you learn right from game to game, it's not always easy to like convert those. I think Lorcana's resource system is quite different than Hearthstone's, for an example. Definitely different from Yu-Gi-Oh's. So when you come into a game like this from a game like those, like how do you develop the skill of learning the new resource system in a game like Lorcana?
Yeah. So I like Magic, for example, uses like the lands resource system and like characters and spells, right? So I think it's kind of like that in a way, right? Like you can use your ink as the lands, and then
Mhm.
you have your spells. But I think fundamentally it's also very different because you can get punished extremely hard for inking the wrong card at the wrong time, right? So it's, for example, like I was talking about, like you shouldn't ink like your goats or your castles or your metamim cards because you need those kind of in the late game to kind of finish the game. But sometimes in the beginning of the game, you kind of need to ink those cards to play your other cards, right?
Yeah,
So it comes down to like, are you going to be able to ink the proper cards at the proper times? And I think there's no hard answer for that, and that's why I think the game is very fun, right?
yeah,
Like there's no like, oh, you must ink this and you have to do this, and it comes with experience. Eventually you'll play enough games and you'll do these certain inking decisions, and some of them work out really well and you're going to keep doing them, and then sometimes it doesn't work, and then you kind of have it in your mind that, oh, it doesn't work, let me try something else.
right.
So I think there's definitely a lot of like experimentation that you can do in this game, and there's no right or wrong answer, and everyone might say something different, like even in regards to playing the same deck, right? So I think that's why this game is really fun. Like, you know everything, it works differently for everybody, and nobody is necessarily right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
And especially you might only be right for a day.
exactly, right.
You
Yeah,
know.
maybe
Uh,
I'm going for the rest of the my Lorcana career, right? And
well, we can agree that by removing cards like Be King Undisputed and Lady Tremaines and not like focusing on them, like we might have made Sapphire match a little weak, right? But on
Mhm.
a day where I think I saw the number today, there was only 120 Ruby Sapphire decks in the field anyway, right? Like there was obviously way more Sapphire Steel decks, but you know, you're like, hey, these cards are particularly good in these like matchups where people only put one thing in play, but they're bad everywhere else. You made the educated choice going, I'm not going to play that card. I'm going to play this other card that's great and do all of these other matchups. And then some decks even did you a favor and put like harps in their deck that just
Mhm.
made your life even easier in some matchups. So
Yeah.
um, it's choices like that that can make or break a tournament. And it could have very easily went the other way. You could have played against seven Sapphire decks, and like maybe it would have like you would Sisu would have sat in your hand. And you're like, great, like this card was bad for me all day. I regret playing it. That didn't
Mhm.
happen, right? We got to see a successful way to play this card again, especially after like two or three tournaments in a row. Virtually the same 58 card deck was winning,
Mhm.
which I think is it's great for the game of Lorcana because you can see that, hey, like just because it's successful doesn't mean it can't evolve. And I think that's like the big takeaway for me is that you were able to figure out a way to evolve it in a particular metagame and now really create this decision of how players might adapt to it for the next month.
Yeah. I mean, I've always loved like kind of innovating, right? Like I think the thing about innovating is the main thing is you're trying to figure out like what kind of problem are you trying to solve, right? Like I think most people are like, "Oh, let's just play this card cuz I like it," right? And the way I frame it is more like I want to play this card because it creates a solution to a problem that, we don't have a solution to at the moment, right? Like I know a lot of people say like, "Oh, Ruby Amethyst versus Emerald Steel extremely unfavored," right? So that's a problem, right?
Yeah.
Hypothesis. we have an issue here, right? It's weighed this way. So how can we fix this, right? So like the DLC in Europe, they end up playing like the Peter Pan Shadow to deal with Diablo, and clearly that worked for him, right?
Yeah.
So after I saw that, I was like, oh, okay, yeah, there's definitely cards that you can play
Mhm.
that can improve the matchup. And for me, like I did try the Peter Pan Shadow, but for me, it was like a little bit too narrow. Like some of the matchups is not great, and I was thinking about other cards, and like Big Sisu kind of made sense to me personally because I've always loved the card Be Prepared, and it's like, why don't you just play like more copies of that card instead?
Yeah.
Right? Yeah,
I mean, if you're a fan of Be Prepared, it makes sense.
yeah, yeah,
Is there any shout outs that you'd like to give a little credit to any of teammates or friends, family, anything like that?
yeah. So I mean, yeah, I know you guys through like George, right? So yeah, I want to give a shout out to George. Like we like bouncing ideas off each other, and like he gives me a lot of like good ideas to kind of use. So yeah, like he's always very supportive, and I like his kind of responses to kind of the questions I ask him. Besides that, I also want to give out a shout out to Hong Su, my
Mhm.
friend that I kind of stayed with for the DLC, and he also got top 16. I'm sure you saw his list, top
Yep.
16 with my exact deck list, right?
Yeah.
And
Not bad.
yeah, so I was talking to him like, when he already flew in like earlier, and I came in like much later. And I think he was also kind of struggling to figure out what deck to run. And he was like, "Oh, what do you think? Like, what should I run?" Right. And I was kind of like cooking some, making final changes on the plane. And I gave him my deck list. And then he was like, "Oh, yeah, that sounds good. Let's go." Right. So yeah, he just took the idea and was like, he ran away with it. Right. And he only lost to like the guy that I lost to in the day one, right? Like Chris Core second place. That's
Yep.
what took him out in the top 16, right?
Crazy.
So yeah, I want to give a shout out to him. He was very supportive as well, and like he did really well with the deck. So
Yeah.
honestly, big props to him as well. He never played the deck before, and he trusted my kind of deck building and like Ruby Amethyst ideas. So yeah, big shout out to him as well.
Now, he's local to you, right?
Yeah. So
And
we
then,
play at locals. Yeah, we play at locals, and he also made top 32 at
okay.
Chicago, and
Yeah.
like, we hung out at that time a lot more, and we became friends, and we talked Ruby Amethyst. He also played Ruby Amethyst in Chicago, but quite a
Okay.
different list. Very unique. He ran like a medallion weight and like a
Oh,
like a,
wow.
a fish hook, right, to
Yeah.
Diablo, and
I
like
mean, hey,
he
man,
yeah.
Inkables, man. That you never know. You never know.
Yeah, I mean, like top 32 is pretty good, like with these kind
Yeah.
of novel ideas, right? So I saw like he had some potential, and he definitely like performed in Fort Worth as well.
Yeah. Early on, it's really great to hear those stories because like Lorcana is so new. So, you're playing these tournaments, you're meeting these new players, you're forming these relationships. So it's really great to hear like this story of like, hey, we showed up, we figured it out, and both of us walked away with a national invite. One of us walked away with a win. Like, incredible weekend for you guys. Definitely congratulations to both of you.
Yeah.
It has been a true pleasure for you here, Cher. Is there anywhere I'm going to pick a bone with you real quick. Did you literally make a Twitter the day that you won?
Maybe like 2 days after, 3 days after, because I guess a lot of people are asking me about it, like, oh, like you should share your story and stuff. I'm sure people would love to hear it, right?
Yeah,
It's like, okay, yeah, okay, sure, let's do
because
it.
when I went to find those pictures, and I was like,
Yeah,
hey, he made a Twitter on the 24th of July.
yeah, 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 yeah. Or like I guess I had like an email associated with it, but I started just kind of using it for like
Okay,
purposes after the win. Yeah,
makes sense. Way to join the social community here, and
yeah,
obviously it helps if people have other ways to find you than just looking for Ed on Discord, which is probably very difficult. I had to cheat. I made someone else find it. Shout out to George again.
yeah.
Uh,
I mean, honestly, to be honest, okay, look, on Discord, I'm actually quite easy to find in, I think, in the Lorcana community. Like, I'm
yeah,
always lurking in like the 20 lore or like the other
right.
kind of popular Lorcana channels.
Hmm.
So actually, a lot of people were able to find me very easily there and like ask me things or like say,
Fair enough. I just knew I had a shortcut with George, so I just took
yeah,
it.
yeah, yeah, that works too. Yeah,
Well, thank you so very much for joining me this evening.
yeah.
Congratulations again.
For having me.
Huge accomplishment, and I look forward to seeing you again in Toronto.
Yeah, we'll definitely see you there.
All right, everyone. Thanks for watching, and we'll catch you in the next video.
Thank you.
See you.
Bye.